You're listening to Uptown Radio, live from New York City. It's 1 p.m., Tuesday, December 11th. I'm Mike Dominski.
And I'm Ora Ogunbiyi. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today on Uptown Radio, protests in College Point, Queens over a new homeless shelter.
These two owners sold out College Point. They lied to us deliberately.
An update on New York City's struggle to fight AIDS.
Reduce the number of new diagnoses of AIDS by 20%.
And what doulas can do for black women in New York City.
I always think if Beyonce was to just say, I had a doula.
All that and more next on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Project docuseries The Wine Show on Ovation TV.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM, New York.
This is All of It. I'm Allison Stewart. Coming up this hour, Karina Longworth, host of the podcast You Must Remember This, on her new book called Seduction, all about old Hollywood and the dynamic and troubled life and many loves of Howard Hughes. Plus, the deadline to enroll in Obamacare is December 15th. And since it's right around the corner, we want to catch you up on all the latest developments in the Affordable Care Act. And later, the Scottish director John S. Baird on his newest film, Stan and Ollie, the story of the relationship between the two comedians better known as Laurel and Hardy. They're portrayed by actors Steve Coogan and John C. Reilly. We'll talk to all three coming up. I'm Allison Stewart. Stay with us. All of It will return after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump says if he doesn't get a border wall, he's shutting down the government. He made as much clear a short time ago at the White House when he sparred in front of the cameras with the Democratic leaders from the House and Senate, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, respectively.
I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. And I'm going to shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut it down.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Moments later, Pelosi and Schumer addressed reporters outside. Senator Schumer says instead of having, as he put it, a temper tantrum, the president can pass bipartisan immigration bills that avoid a shutdown.
Pass the 6 other appropriations bills that have been agreed to by Democrats and Republicans and do a 1-year extension of the Homeland Security bill by what's called a CR, which just funds it the same way it funded it last year. Or do a 1-year CR for all 7 remaining appropriations bills.
Now, separately, President Trump referenced Senate plans to hold a vote on a bill that would revise sentencing laws for individuals convicted of certain federal crimes in an effort to reduce the number of people in the crowded federal prison system. We have more from NPR's Aisha Roscoe.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Senate will consider criminal justice legislation during the lame duck session. McConnell has been facing pressure from the White House to hold a vote on the legislative package. In addition to changing sentencing policies, the bill would also offer incentives to prisoners to participate in training programs that help prepare them for life after incarceration. President Trump endorsed the legislation last month. Some Republicans in the Senate have opposed the bill, saying it might allow dangerous criminals to go free. The bill's sponsors made changes to address some of those concerns. Aisha Roscoe, NPR News, Washington.
The International Crisis Group says it's aware of reports that one of its employees, a Canadian former diplomat, is detained in China. NPR's Jackie Northam reports it's unclear if the detention is linked to a bail hearing in Canada for an executive of Chinese tech giant Huawei.
The International Crisis Group says it's trying to obtain more information about the possible detention of its Northeast Asia senior advisor, Michael Kovrig. A fluent Mandarin speaker, Kovrig previously worked as a Canadian diplomat in Beijing and Hong Kong. It's too early to say if Kovrig's detention has anything to do with the arrest in Canada of Meng Wanzhou, a senior executive executive at Huawei. Her detention was at the request of the U.S. China has lashed out at the Canadian government over Meng's arrest, warning there could be grave consequences if she wasn't immediately released. Jackie Northam, NPR News, Washington.
You're listening to NPR News.
For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Sophia Jeremias. Today, the Manhattan District Attorney and State Police plan to arrest over a dozen Bloomberg LP executives. The executives are accused of fraud, theft, and taking kickbacks and bribes from subcontractors. Bloomberg LP's owner, former Mayor Michael Bloomberg, is considering a run for president in 2020. The first of 3 hearings on Amazon's move to Long Island City is happening tomorrow morning. City Council Speaker Corey Johnson has made it clear that he's against the plan for new Amazon headquarters in Queens.
I think if something's fundamentally wrong when you're giving this much money away and public land away and it is cloaked in secrecy.
City Council has promised to demand answers from Amazon and city officials during the hearings. A protest is planned to take place outside City Hall before the hearing. Yesterday, police officers were suspended after a video showed them pulling a woman's 1-year-old child from her arms. The woman was waiting at a public benefits office in Brooklyn. No seats were available and she sat on the floor. A dispute occurred and police were called. The mother is also facing charges for resisting arrest. Some subway trains are going to get a little bit faster. The MTA is planning to increase speed limits on several lines. Over the weekend, the speed limit was already doubled from 15 to 30 miles on parts of the N and R train. After 2 trains collided 23 years ago, strict rules were put in place to slow trains down. Andy Byford, CEO of the MTA, says the rules have gone overboard and caused trains to run too slowly. Inwood residents are suing the city over a rezoning plan approved in August. The plan will allow for more high-density development in the neighborhood, and residents worry that it will make the area more expensive. Inwood is touted as one of the last affordable neighborhoods in Manhattan. United States House Representative Adriana Espaillat has supported the lawsuit. Columbia University officials continue to denounce an undergraduate student who went on a racially charged tirade over the weekend. The student, Julian von Abel, was caught on video supporting white supremacist views. At one point, he yelled, "White people are the best thing that happened to the world." Students around him challenged the comments, and one called him a degenerate. Sophia Jeremias, Columbia Radio News.
On Friday, after several months of speculation, President Trump announced that Chief of Staff John Kelly would be stepping down at the end of the year. Over the weekend, Trump's replacement pick, Mike Pence's Chief of Staff Nick Ayers, turned down the job. We're here with Olivia Nuzzi, New York Magazine's Washington correspondent, about the latest White House mix-up. Olivia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I think it's important to clarify, what does the Chief of Staff actually do?
The Chief of Staff is basically tasked with running the day-to-day of the White House. They're supposed to kind of keep the trains running on time. So you need somebody who's organized and typically somebody who has experience in management. The Trump Chief of Staff job is different than a typical Chief of Staff job because you're expected to come into this chaotic environment where people are trying to leak against one another or get rid of one another, and you're supposed to impose some sort of order. I don't know that John Kelly did that. I think if you look at the way that the Trump White House has been run over the last year since he came on board, you could point to many examples that suggest he was not effective.
And you speculated on Twitter why you think Kelly's departure might be happening now. Tell me a bit more about that.
The president is thinking about 2020 for the first time, which might sound ridiculous since we've all been speculating about 2020 for a couple months now. But we're post-midterms. I think he's looking ahead and thinking about what he's going to need to do in terms of legislative accomplishments in the next year and a half to 2 years, so that he has something to talk about on the campaign trail. And I think he wants somebody who can help him cut deals on the Hill. And John Kelly had very little interest in sort of navigating that terrain. And that's why Nick Ayers seemed like a good choice, because he is known as this sort of sleek operator. But either he had no interest in the job, which is kind of the prevailing wisdom right now, although my reporting suggests that the president did not really want him as badly as he has made it sound in kind of his spin about declining the job.
Okay, and now that Nick Ayers is out of the running, who do you think is his most logical pick?
Well, the conventional wisdom today is that Mark Meadows, who's part of the Freedom Caucus on the Hill, is the number one pick. But this is something that is changing on an almost hourly basis. You could see the president was talking Tuesday morning on Twitter saying that there are, quote, 10 people vying for and wanting the White House chief of staff position. He's very frustrated that the press is reporting that nobody really wants this job because it is so, there's such a microscope on people who have this job, and you become the target of a lot of press attention and a lot of jealousy on the inside, people who are trying to get rid of you or blaming you for things that are going wrong. But this is something that's changing constantly. I was speaking to a White House official yesterday who told me that the decision could be made anytime from this week to a month from now. A month in Donald Trump years is like 3 years. You know, a million different news cycles will happen in that month. And so it's very hard to predict who will fall away and who will kind of prevail in a apprentice-like drama like this.
And as someone who's been covering him since the beginning, Olivia, is there anything that he could do that would surprise you anymore?
If he changed his hair, I'd be surprised.
That's great. New York Magazine's Washington correspondent Olivia Nuzzi, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Mike Dominski.
And I'm Ora Ogunbiyi.
It's getting cold, and an estimated 4,000 New Yorkers spend their nights on the streets. But residents of College Point, Queens are protesting plans for a new homeless shelter in their community. Javier Mariwala reports.
On a cold Sunday in December, hundreds of residents of College Point gathered to rally against a proposed shelter in the middle of the neighborhood. The building had been purchased by Liberty One, a Brooklyn-based real estate group, in the spring of this year. According to permits filed by the new owners, the building was set to become a retail store. At the rally on Sunday, Paul Vallone, the New York City Council member for the district, led the protests.
These two owners sold out College Point for a profit and didn't tell anybody. No, they lied to us deliberately.
Only 2 weeks ago, the Department of Homeless Services told Vallone and the College Point community that the building would actually be turned into a shelter that would house 200 homeless men. Christopher Murray is a lawyer based in the area. He questions the city's actions.
Well, the problem with what the city is doing is they're deciding on locations to put these shelters without doing the review that they're required to do by law. They're supposed to look at the impact on the medical services, on schools, on safety, on transportation, traffic.
At a civic meeting in the week prior, a representative of the Department of Homeless Services, Jackie Bray, said she could not comment on the matter of permits. She did admit, however, that the department had failed to be transparent in how it conducted its reviews. At the meeting, many parents expressed potential safety concerns with the shelter's location, and among them was Nancy Defendini.
So my daughter has to take a bus that's on 20th Avenue. She's going to pass by there. So I'm worried about that. 200 men there, and if they're in front of the building, I'm afraid what could happen to her.
Defendini has been a resident of College Point for the last 20 years and is a mother to 3 daughters. Representatives from the city maintain that the shelter will not house registered sex offenders or residents with serious mental health issues. Defendini remains unconvinced.
We want to stop this. There's other things that they could put in that building, but not a homeless shelter, not there.
Over the last decade, this community of 20,000 has seen a police academy, a motor vehicles office, and 2 sanitation department buildings built in the neighborhood. Yet the area doesn't have a train station or even a hospital. Residents like Kathleen Shannon feel like the city is dumping on them.
I'm not trying to vilify the people who need help. I feel like they do need help, and I feel like they should have second chances. I just feel like this was very underhanded, and they didn't take the considerations or the needs of the people living there before they did it.
The College Point community is trying to raise funds to hire a lawyer. It plans on suing the city as well as the current owners of the building. If they fail to succeed, however, the shelter could be opened by September of next year. Javier Mariwala, Columbia Radio News.
New York has been trying a new approach to fight AIDS. Data released at the start of the month suggests it might be working. Ora Ogunbi reports.
New York State has more people living with AIDS than any other state. But this year, new HIV diagnoses are down 5%. This looks like progress for Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, who spoke at a World AIDS Day event last week.
And I'm so proud that we have gone a long way. We've reduced the number of new diagnoses of AIDS by 20%. We're down 5% from last year. We're down 9% from the year before that. Every single year we are making progress.
She thinks that much of this progress is down to a new public health campaign, U equals U, which stands for undetectable equals untransmittable.
We need to embrace this whole concept, U equals U, and help make that one of our key strategies to eradicate the stigma associated with HIV.
What does it mean to be undetectable? I met up with Vaughn Taylor, who runs the Brooklyn-based organization Gay Men of African Descent. He told me that it's about reducing the amount of the virus that lives in the body.
We know that the lower the viral load, the less likely of HIV transmission. If someone is consistent with taking their treatment, they can actually bring their viral load down to undetectable levels. And that is our ultimate goal. I mean, there's always a mathematical probability of transmission.
Might be more accurate to say undetectable kind of equals untransmittable.
I'm HIV positive, going on 11 years now. I've been undetectable for 10. So I've been handling it pretty well.
That's Wayne Taylor. He takes his medication consistently and is very open about his HIV status. However, the battle to break stigma is a very personal issue for him. Wayne is a black gay man from Alabama. After finding out his diagnosis while incarcerated, he was released to a family that isolated him further.
Family didn't take it too well. My mom has grown accustomed to it, and she's been helping me, being there for me. Everybody else, we really don't speak of it.
Even though he's now been undetectable for 10 years, he doesn't buy the whole U equals U concept. He fears that it encourages people to be reckless when it comes to their sexual health.
I have been lucky enough to keep myself healthy, to exercise, to take my medicine when I'm supposed to. At this time, I'm supposed to do it. Some people don't do that. Yeah, you can be undetectable, but you can still transmit if you're not going to protect yourself.
Wayne believes the reason why black men are disproportionately affected by the AIDS epidemic is because they keep their sexuality and their status a secret.
And then we have some gay men, I'm not going to say all of them, but we have a good percentage of men that do not get themselves tested and are willing to keep that secret.
Black men are still more likely to die from AIDS-related causes than any other demographic, and keeping your HIV status a secret until it's too late might be why. New York's health department might think that U equals U is key to breaking the stigma, but for black gay men, it's not that simple. Ora Ogunbi, Columbia Radio News. There's another health crisis facing New York City: maternal mortality. A black woman in New York City is 12 times more likely than a white woman to die from causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. Local lawmakers are trying to change that by exploring what doulas can do for black women. Camille Peterson reports.
Berenice Kernizan is a doula based in Brooklyn. She knows that doulas aren't exactly a household name.
I always think if Beyonce was to just say, I had a doula,
then more people would know what doulas do. Basically, they're guides and advocates. They give advice on things like handling nausea, help women plan out what they want giving birth to be like. Do they want a C-section, an epidural, a midwife? And they stick up for women in the hospital.
just having one more person to be like, yep, that's what she wants. We're going to make sure she gets the same exact thing she wants or as close as possible.
Sometimes that means navigating tensions between doctors, nurses, and doulas. Kernizan has a strategy for that.
No matter what happens, you have to have thick skin and just put honey on everything. That's what someone told me when I first started doula training, and I think that was the best advice I got.
She thinks doulas are especially important for Black women. She brings up Serena Williams, the tennis star. After giving birth, Williams told nurses and doctors that she couldn't breathe and wanted her lungs checked for blood clots. They ignored her at first.
She had to advocate for herself. If they wouldn't even listen to Serena Williams, imagine what's going on with regular women when they go to the hospital. Black women need support and validation because we are the experts of our own bodies.
Heidi Jones studies maternal health at CUNY. She agrees that Serena Williams' experience shows how racism can play out in the medical system.
Maybe providers have internalized some of their own biases and they don't listen to women of color the way that they listen to white women.
Jones says increasing access to doulas is worth exploring and that they can be a check on doctors' biases.
We know that having an advocate can be helpful. Doctors' behaviors are different when there's sort of two people there than when there's one person there.
But she also thinks the racial inequality in maternal death rates comes from big issues in New York City, like poverty and segregated neighborhoods. Until the city addresses those issues, doulas
might be sort of band-aids to the bigger change that needs to happen.
And Cynthia Giamfi-Bannerman, an OBGYN and professor at Columbia University, says something else is responsible: heart disease.
It's unclear up front how a doula would be helpful. I don't have anything against doulas, but I think it's really short-sighted if we think that that's going to solve the problem.
Natalia Gibbs, a volunteer doula, knows the women she works with have to worry about conditions like high blood pressure. But she finds that they need the most help with practical things she didn't even think about until she became a doula.
I had this one person who was like, I'm having a lot of contractions, and the doctor said it's because I'm dehydrated, but I don't have any money to buy water, and the water in my building isn't great.
Gibbs thinks those challenges come from bigger issues.
They're suffering, and they're suffering because they're poor. And that on top of that, they're pregnant and everything sucks.
For many women she works with,
this isn't a new struggle. It's just a struggle that now they have as a pregnant person.
Gibbs does whatever she can to help. She says childbirth is the easy part of her job. Camille Peterson, Columbia Radio News.
Right now, you have to be a citizen or have a green card to get a driver's license in New York. A new law might change that and make the lives of undocumented New Yorkers a lot easier. Maura Lavelle reports.
Living without a license is a daily problem for Raina Andrew.
I work at a place where there's no public transportation. Like, there's no bus, there's not a train I could take. I am forced to take a cab every day from my home to go to work, from my work to go home.
And that can get expensive. Andrew estimates she spends $60 a week on cabs. Andrew's 22. She's a beneficiary of the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals Law, or DACA. That means she's not a citizen and not a U.S. permanent resident, so no license in New York. She lives on Long Island. Out there's no subway and the buses are sporadic. Relying on cabs makes Raina late to doctor's appointments, to work, and to pick up her 6-year-old son from school.
And the school will tell me, you have to be here by 3:30. You can't be late. If this keeps on happening, we have to call social services on you because this is child abuse. When they told me that, I was so scared. I'm like, I try my best to be here.
Andrew would benefit from the passing of the Driver's License Access and Privacy Act, currently a bill in the New York State Assembly. She gathered with several other activists, immigrants' rights groups, and politicians on the steps of City Hall last week to talk about the bill and other initiatives. State Senator Luis Sepulveda is one of the sponsors of the bill.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes.
Sepulveda sees driving as an important right for immigrants. He also says the bill is a win-win for documented and undocumented people.
Even if you're not undocumented, look at the impact economically that this potentially can have. So now parents can drive, especially outside of the city of New York, can drive to the economic centers, to the malls, to the stores, and spend money.
This sort of law already exists in 12 states and the District of Columbia. There, people can show a foreign birth certificate or other documentation to get a license. Still, not everyone is sure it's a great idea.
I'd have to see how the driver's license looks and how similar it is to the normal driver's license.
That's Matt Sussis, the Assistant Director of Communications at the Center for Immigration, a think tank in D.C. that favors lower immigration numbers. His biggest concern about this bill is national security.
The 9/11 Commission came out and said that for security purposes, We should not be giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants unless they are very clearly differentiated from normal driver's license.
Most New York Republicans agree. They oppose the bill. But Raina Andrew believes the bill will pass. On the steps of City Hall, she imagines what her life could be with a license.
I could be a more productive member in my community and also be a more productive mother in terms of attending school meetings, getting around to doing more volunteer work.
The bill will come up for a vote in the new year. If it does pass, Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo has indicated he will sign it. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Maura Lavelle.
Driving is one way to get around the city, but what about scooters? For now, all e-scooters and some e-bikes are illegal. You can buy one, but riding it can get you a $500 fine. The City Council has introduced a bill to change that. Libby Cathy reports.
Outside City Hall, a group of lawmakers introduces a bill to legalize e-scooters and throttle e-bikes. E-scooter companies stand on either side of Councilmember Rafael Espinal as he argues the transportation is affordable, accessible, and green.
Our MTA is crumbling, congestion's at an all-time high, people are relying on bikes, and they're looking for other modes to get around. An e-scooter, an e-bike is that alternative.
The announcement comes as e-scooter companies like Bird and Lime are lobbying to enter the New York market. Espinal said the council is acting now partly because of Mayor de Blasio's resistance.
I think the best thing that could have happened to e-bike riders was the mayor in the beginning of January declaring all-out war against the riders. That motivated a lot of us and motivated the community to push back.
De Blasio reluctantly passed pedal assist city bikes earlier this year, but remains skeptical of expanding. Here he is at a different press conference last week.
I'm staying exactly where I am on the e-bikes. E-scooters are so new in most cities that we really don't have a take yet on the pros and cons. But any solution must address public safety.
As e-scooters flood city streets nationwide, regulators are grappling with safety concerns. In June, San Francisco banned e-scooters after hundreds of complaints, which cited them scattered across sidewalks and riders knocking over pedestrians. And in just 1 month, 3 e-scooter riders, following their respective city laws, were struck and killed by cars. When pressed on safety, Espinal said,
"The danger is not the vehicle, it's not the bike. It's the behavior of whoever decides to break the law and go against traffic, ride on the sidewalks. That's what we should be focusing on."
Edwin Figueroa of Transportation Alternatives has advocated to legalize throttle e-bikes for the past 2 years. He says low-wage delivery workers often get blamed for unsafe roads, but really, that's the job of the city.
City is failing the cyclists and failing the delivery workers. We're using the umbrella of what's supposed to be a safety component to reduce the amount of injuries and fatalities in New York City is being used to unfairly burden this delivery cyclist.
Matt Chuley agrees. E-scooters are a viable alternative to the real problem, cars.
You don't need a 4,000-pound vehicle to carry a 150-pound person a couple of miles.
A decade ago, she bought herself a Segway. But today, it sits in storage.
I got harassed by the NYPD and had to give it up.
The 66-year-old sees potential in e-scooters helping seniors, like herself.
If they have mild mobility problems, it's a lifesaver. It can still get you around. You can walk with your husband, even though you may have a bad hip or he has a bad knee. The thing I hate the most is other places have them, and I think New York City should have everything that other places have and should have them first.
The bill needs 26 votes and the mayor's approval to become law.
I'll be the first one back on the street the day this law gets passed.
City Council is expected to hold a hearing on the legislation early in the new year. Libby Cathy, Columbia Radio News.
Right now, garbage trucks from around 250 private waste companies are on the streets of New York City servicing businesses. In a few years, that number may drop to just 5. Janice Bian reports.
Every business in New York City hires its own sanitation company. That means every bodega, every restaurant, every office building on one block might have a different hauler pick up its trash. Justin Wood, Director of Research and Organizing at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, says the system is really inefficient.
The inefficiency is sort of rampant. Missed waste pickups or waste being left on the streets. You know, the city doesn't even know which company to blame a lot of the time.
The city is hoping to change that through its commercial waste zone plan. Under this plan, the Department of Sanitation will divide the city into 20 zones and will allow only a few carters to operate in each zone.
We think if it's done right, it's like a win-win-win.
Others aren't so optimistic. Joe Esteves owns a 2-person sanitation company. He and one other worker pick up waste for about 100 businesses in Brooklyn. He says he's worried that the city won't select smaller sanitation companies like his to service one of the 20 zones.
What happens to them if they don't win a zone because they're not big enough or they're too small or they just can't do it? And then what happens to all these employees?
In order for waste haulers to win one of the contracts that'll allow them to service a zone, they'll have to convince the city that they can meet certain environmental and safety standards. And to meet those standards, carters may have to buy new trucks or implement all these new programs, something that's beyond the means of a mom-and-pop sanitation company.
A smaller guy like me, I don't have the money to do stuff like that.
No one seems to know exactly how many sanitation workers may lose their jobs, but the number of sanitation companies will certainly decrease. Some say by a lot. Kendall Christensen is the executive director of a trade association that represents private waste carters. He says under the current plan, just 5 carting companies may run the commercial waste scene.
The city's plan could severely disrupt how the industry currently operates without any guarantee that a new system would make it any better.
The city will hold a public forum tonight to discuss the waste zone plan. Justin Wood plans to attend.
This has never been done in a city the size of New York, and so we're really excited about it.
And those who oppose it, they'll be there too. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Janice Bian.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Ora Ogunbiyi.
And I'm Mike Dominski.
Coming up, a biographer of Atticus Finch on Broadway's new production of To Kill a Mockingbird.
And the investigation of a hate crime in Flatbush, Brooklyn.
These stories and more. But first, these headlines.
For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Janice Bian. Google CEO Sundar Pichai is testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. Both Republicans and Democrats are questioning Pichai on Google's data collection and use. Republicans have also focused on whether Google's search algorithms are biased against conservative websites. Today, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi will meet with President Trump to avoid a government shutdown. President Trump has demanded funding for a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. He says that if Democrats won't agree to fund the wall, the military will build it. Schumer and Pelosi have said that funding for the wall should not be an obstacle to a bipartisan budget deal. A snowstorm dropped 2 feet of snow in the southeast. So far, it's left more than 75,000 homes and businesses without power and led to over 1,800 flight cancellations. In Ohio, authorities arrested 2 people who allegedly planned terror attacks in the Toledo area. One of the suspects, Elizabeth Lacrone, had frequently posted on social media about the Columbine mass shooting and the Charleston, South Carolina church shooting by Dylan Roof. 5 U.S. Marines disappeared about a week ago in an aviation accident off the coast of Japan. They were declared dead today, joining a growing number of deadly military accidents, including the collision of 2 naval warships last summer. That collision killed 17 sailors. Time magazine named journalists targeted for their work as 2018's Person of the Year. One of the journalists, Maria Ressa, reported on government-sanctioned killings under President Duterte.
I am not a criminal. I have been a journalist my entire life. I will continue to hold the government accountable.
Jamal Khashoggi, Wal Lone, Joseph Wu, and staff of the Capital Gazette were also recognized. The journalists will be featured on 4 different covers of Time magazine. At the climate summit in Poland, the U.S. joined Russia, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia in opposing a UN report on global warming. Yesterday, the U.S. also held an event about the importance of coal and nuclear energy, to audience cheers. The summit will wrap up this week. David Lipton, top official at the International Monetary Fund, fears the global banking system is unprepared to recover from the next recession, despite the fact that it's been 10 years since the last financial meltdown. Today, British Prime Minister Theresa May postponed a vote on the most recent Brexit deal. May acknowledged that British lawmakers wouldn't have passed her plan, so she's hoping to renegotiate the deal with European Union officials. EU President Donald Tusk said the European Union would not renegotiate. The UK will be forced to leave the Union on March 29th. Janice Bian, Columbia Radio News.
Thank you, Janice. A month ago, in Flatbush, Brooklyn, a white man attacked a black woman when she was on her way home from the subway. The NYPD still hasn't arrested anyone. Jivika Verma reports on how activists in Flatbush are demanding answers.
53-year-old Caribbean woman Anne Marie Washington was coming home from work on a Friday evening when a white man attacked her at Church Avenue Station.
As soon as I got off the train, I heard a lot of commotion, and I heard this woman speaking really loudly, and when I got upstairs, I saw Anne Marie standing up, hunched over. I saw blood on the floor.
That's Kezia Bernard. She lives in Flatbush and was the community's driving force in bringing awareness to the crime. She took a video of Washington and a witness after the attack, which quickly went viral.
This white man saw her, started punching her in her face because she was black. I ran up here looking for police, none in sight. I know I'm not feeling good, I'm fighting back.
This video is how community advocate Anthony Beckford heard what had happened.
My Facebook inbox was going crazy. My text messages was going crazy. It was the same video playing over and over again. From there, I arranged a press conference for the next day because there was no news coverage. There was nobody speaking out about it. I was not about to let this get buried.
Beckford has been representing Washington since the attack.
There's negligence going across the board when it comes to NYPD, FDNY, and MTA. They did not shut down the train. It took them 10 to 15 minutes to get there.
For this story, MTA refused to comment and NYPD did not respond to requests for an interview. Beckford also says that NYPD did not do the right thing by first calling the crime a robbery.
The only attempt of robbery was a robbery of her life, a robbery of her dignity. She's telling you that she walked past a person and the person brutally attacked her. And you see that she coughed up blood in front of you.
Medical responders sent Washington home after the attack. She didn't realize how badly she was hurt until she saw blood on her sheets the next morning. She was rushed to emergency surgery. NYPD also did not check cameras around the station. A sketch was eventually released, but Beckford says advocates are having to do NYPD's job for them.
They had Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. After we demanded again for there to be a sketch, that's when, later on that day, they released a sketch.
Alicia Boyd, a leading advocate in Flatbush, says this kind of police treatment speaks to how the city treats her community.
We finally were able to get it labeled as a hate crime, and yet the videotapes of this man have not been dispersed. No one knows what he looks like. And so it sounds like to me that this is another way in which the crimes against people of color are not important.
Imani Harris is a grassroots organizer in Flatbush who blames rising gentrification for the attack against Washington. On December 1st, he called for an emergency town hall to tackle this problem. The meeting went on for hours and saw over 60 community members discuss strategies for banding together.
So it was the community itself that demanded that it even be a hate crime. The community called press conference, that they released the video and made sure that went viral. You know, the family did a GoFundMe page. They asked for $10,000. They got more than $10,000 because community.
The investigation has now been handed over to the NYPD Hate Crime Task Force, but Harris doesn't think it'll help.
We're going to have to catch this person, but I don't have any faith in the police.
Meanwhile, Washington continues to recover with her attackers still on the loose. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Jeevika Varma.
On Friday, after several months of speculation, President Trump announced that Chief of Staff John Kelly would be stepping down at the end of the year. Over the weekend, Trump's replacement pick, Mike Pence's Chief of Staff Nick Ayers, turned down the job. We're here with Olivia Nuzzi, New York Magazine's Washington correspondent, about the latest White House mix-up. Olivia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, I think it's important to clarify, what does the Chief of Staff actually do? New York state lawmakers are proposing another background check for people who want to buy guns. Police would examine years of Facebook and Instagram posts, tweets, online comments, and internet search histories. Alia Chaudhry reports.
At Westside Rifle and Pistol Range in Flatiron, there is a sign on the wall that says, "My right to own a gun is what protects your right to tell me I can't." Beginners practice shooting at targets while the bullet shells spill out of the side of the weapon. Background checks are required to buy a firearm in New York State. On top of that, a license is required to buy a pistol anywhere in the state or a rifle in New York City. Applications for licenses for pistols and revolvers already require mental illness and criminal history. Soon, they may ask for social media and internet search history as well. State Senator Kevin Parker told the Associated Press that in previous shootings,
we saw warnings and red flags in people's social media.
Parker proposed two bills, one for rifle and shotgun delivery, and one for licenses for pistols and revolvers. An applicant would need to hand over their logins and passwords for a review of 3 years of social media and 1 year of internet search history. The police would scour the online history for slurs, biased language, threats, and intent to commit terrorism.
It's a new time. It's a new technology. It's time that we, in fact, start having that conversation about how we monitor social media.
Andrew Massimilian writes for Tactical Life magazine and runs Manhattan Shooting Excursions.
They're asking you to give up your First Amendment rights to obtain a Second Amendment right, and they don't even consider it a right. They consider it a privilege.
He said the laws won't change much,
other than quell free speech and make people less apt to apply for a gun license because it's either too expensive, socially unacceptable, or with a lot of government tape.
The bills ask for reviews of Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter accounts, as well as searches on Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Jack Roselle, a professor of law and psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh, points out that this excludes some right-wing social platforms. The police won't be looking at Gab, for example, where the Pittsburgh shooter had made posts.
In threat work, we have a saying that we got to collect the dots before we connect the dots. And there are some really important dots floating around on social media.
Interpretation is an issue with social media. Some posts are clear-cut, but
what about the stuff in between, which is where most of the concerns might arise?
He says another issue with the bills is what the police will do with information on social media that points to other unrelated crimes. Roselle thinks the bills have a long way to go.
The law, it's a law professor's dream and a legislator's nightmare. It creates a lot of very interesting questions, but it provides very few practical solutions.
Social media may offer a lot of information about a person, but it may offer too much. Handling it is a key concern and challenge. Alia Chaudhry, Columbia Radio News.
Mandela Garden in Harlem housed wildflowers, plants, bugs, and birds. Then last month, the city bulldozed it to make room for an affordable housing complex. But supporters of the garden are fighting to get their land back. Maggie Green reports.
The meadow may be gone, but the Mandela Community Garden is suing the city for the right to keep their land on West 126th Street. In New York State Supreme Court, the garden argued for the rights of nature as an injured party in the fight. Garden leader Renee Calvo says it's a milestone for environmental law, and
that means that, the city can't just go in and bulldoze gardens, that they have to consider the rights of nature. And that's very powerful.
But the City Department of Housing Preservation and Development says they were following normal procedures when they rolled construction equipment onto the lot. The city owns the land and wants to put up a building with 37 affordable housing units, retail space, and community space. Calvo says the city crossed a line. The garden already had a restraining order against the city to keep them out of the space while they finished their harvest, but
their position was that the plants were not the property of the garden,
and therefore could be removed without permission. Calvo says he hasn't been back to the garden since that day.
I can barely even walk by it. Why would I do that to myself?
The lot where the garden once bloomed is now marked by piles of dirt, dead vines hanging over a chain-link fence, and scattered furniture. But a few tiny, yellow, pear-shaped tomatoes in a garden box near the fence evoke Calvo's image of the garden in spring.
Wall-to-wall blossoms. It was really a miracle.
But the city says people are more important than plants. In a statement, a housing department spokesman said that the garden was only supposed to occupy the lot temporarily, and that the city's affordable housing crisis is too severe to ignore. During a rally on the steps outside the Supreme Court, City Councilman Rafael Espinal wanted the two groups to find common ground.
Affordable housing is important, but community gardens are important as well to creating sustainable communities, and we cannot continue pitting the two together because the two need to exist side by side.
Nearby, Mandela Garden members and other community organizers chanted, "Save our gardens! Save our gardens!" In court, Judge Joan Madden asked for the Mandela Garden to consider moving to one of 9 other sites offered by the Housing Department. But the garden supporters say these lots are smaller than the Mandela Garden, and many aren't in direct sunlight. Plus, 3 already have community gardens on the property. Caitlin Boaz is an environmental policy consultant, and she says the idea of moving the garden doesn't make sense because
when it comes down to it, a community garden isn't really a space that can be lifted up and moved, even if it is just down the block, because it is where it is.
In the meantime, the lot is still empty. Joanna Hodge, a lifelong Harlem resident and a mom, says she's in favor of the housing development if the city provides youth programming.
As long as they help the community, that's all I'm worried about.
Which the city plans to do with technology education classes for children, among other programs. But gardener Calvo says the meadow's destruction isn't worth a few dozen apartments.
It's not in the public interest to have wall-to-wall, shore-to-shore concrete.
He says that green infrastructure like the garden can prevent climate change and help the city become more sustainable. In Harlem, Maggie Green, Columbia Radio News.
In Inwood, just north of Harlem, Carrot Top Pastries has been a neighborhood staple for 40 years. It's where people grab their morning coffee or get a thick slab of carrot cake after work. But now, the bakery is closing because of a bigger issue in New York City. Sarah Weissman reports.
Renee Mancino loved to bake. She started Carrot Top Pastries selling carrot cake out of her apartment. Eventually, Mancino opened 2 Uptown bakeries, the first in Inwood and the second in Washington Heights. Inwood resident Arlene Schulman has been going to Carrot Top Pastries for 20 years. She liked the atmosphere Mancino created and her coconut layer cake.
She was just such a dynamic personality, loved to talk, was always engaging, and she lent such a vibrant spirit to the establishment. You could feel the love in her cakes.
But when Mancino committed suicide 4 years ago, Schulman and her neighbors were devastated. Mancino's husband took over the bakery. Still, her death hangs over the shop. Her decorations are still up. Pictures of the couple hang on the wall.
$2 is your change. Thank you very much.
Pedro Prudencio has been working at Carrot Top's Inwood location for 10 years. He likes the idea of keeping Mancino's legacy alive. But the bakery recently lost 40% of its business, according to Mancino's husband. A year ago, Prudencio came in one morning and found that there was a problem with the gas.
I was calling the super to find out what's going on, and they say that the night before they have a leak in the building. So they had to close it, and we thought that it was going to be just for 1 week.
Turns out it wasn't 1 week. The entire building was being repiped. There's still no gas a year later. Even though Carrot Top bakes most of its treats in Washington Heights, the Inwood shop was known for its fresh muffins and cookies. Now the restaurant kitchen doesn't have a working oven.
A restaurant without kitchen is nothing.
Carrot Top's landlord, Joseph Spiroli, says the bakery isn't the only building with this issue.
It's almost an epidemic up in Inwood. You can walk down Inwood Park Terrace over there and probably run into 10 buildings that have no gas.
Spiroli says this is a growing trend, not just in Inwood, and it's gotten worse in the last couple years. When a tenant reports a leak, Con Edison and the Department of Buildings often tell owners to redo all of their pipes, instead of dealing with each leak on its own. The goal is to modernize old buildings for safety, but these projects spend months, leaving both tenants and landlords in the lurch.
You know, you have master plumbers with decades and decades of experience who will come in and tell you, I can fix this in 3 or 4 days. There's got to be a way to address specific leaks without shutting down entire buildings like this.
The Department of Buildings received 12,000 notices about gas issues last year, according to a 2017 report. It labeled 10% of them high risk for city residents. And Con Edison spokesman Alfonso Quiroz says situations like Carrot Top's aren't the company's fault. It has to shut down gas lines until landlords get leaks fixed, however long that takes. Sarah Weissman, Columbia Radio News.
To Kill a Mockingbird has come to Broadway. The iconic American novel, published in 1960, is opening at the Schubert Theater on Thursday, but the play has stirred controversy. We're joined now by Joseph Crespino, professor of history at Emory University, who wrote a biography of Atticus Finch. Thank you for being with us today, Professor.
Thanks so much for having me.
So for someone who has never read the book To Kill a Mockingbird, what is it that makes this novel such an American classic?
It's a beautiful story that evokes the childhood of these characters growing up. As they grow up, as they come of age, they realize there are lots of injustices and immoralities and awful things that exist in this town, and they try to make sense of it with the help of their beloved, noble, loving father, Atticus Finch, who, you know, in a time of crisis does the right thing and takes this case and defends a African-American man wrongly accused of raping a white woman.
So as a historian, you wrote a biography of Atticus Finch, who of course is a fictional character.
Right.
Yeah. You spoke a little bit about him earlier.
Not everybody realizes that, unfortunately. Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about his role in the novel earlier, but what made you so intrigued by Atticus Finch specifically to make you write a biography of him, a fictional character?
He's just this touchstone, right, of decency and probity in American life. As late as January 2017, Barack Obama, in his farewell address, when he's talking about kind of the importance of empathy, he invokes the character of Atticus Finch and the advice that Atticus gives to his daughter Scout, that you never really understand a person till you crawl in their skin and walk around in it.
Moving forward to 2018, now we have the play version of To Kill a Mockingbird opening on Broadway this coming Thursday. The writer of the play, specifically Aaron Sorkin, has made other significant changes to characters and plot, as well as certainly Atticus Finch.
It's also true, though, that the novel continues to be controversial. I mean, year in, year out, it seems there's a school district somewhere who decides not to teach it or takes it off a recommended reading list. And part of that probably has to do with the use of the N-word, which is so prominent throughout the novel. And it's also true that there's some dated things about the novel. I mean, the fact that the hero is Atticus, the white guy, and the African-American characters are just these kind of stock figures who have no real voice or agency. So all of these things, but the fact that it's beloved, but the fact that it's got these dated qualities to it would make it really hard to, to adapt and bring up to date. But it's one of the reasons why I think people are so interested to see what they do.
The play also makes some other changes, not just to Atticus Finch, but it also gives African-American characters in the novel some larger roles and some more space to express frustration and anger. Do you feel that this more accurately reflects the reality of racial relations at that time?
Yeah, I think that not only does it do something that people for a long time didn't do, and that is to kind of even consider the voice and perspective of African Americans. Of course, it's not like a playwright has to give an African American character agency. Those African Americans in history had agency. They had voices. The problem for so long was that white people didn't listen to them. Any playwright writing in 2018 would need to do that. It's absolutely the right. It would be offensive to the audience if they didn't do that. It also would be a missed opportunity dramatically not to include that as part of the drama that they're putting up there on the stage.
Will you try to see the play? Do you want to see it? Will you see it?
Yes, I have seen it in previews. And the final set version, I'll be seeing it soon up in New York. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. And I thought it was fascinating.
Fantastic. Well, the play version of To Kill a Mockingbird is opening at Schubert Theater on Thursday. That was Professor Joseph Crespino. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Mike. Tipping your doorman during the holidays is a New York City tradition. And every year, people wonder, what's the right amount to tip? Lara Kleinschmidt reports on how it's more complicated than you might think.
It's mid-December, which means that for residents with doormen, it's time to start thinking about the customary holiday tip.
Is the delivery coming up?
But it's not so straightforward. The relationship between doorman and tenant is more nuanced than you might think.
I mean, we have to know the quirks, the ins, the outs, what to say, what not to say, when to keep our mouths shut, who should be coming in, who shouldn't be coming in.
That's Keelan. He's been a doorman uptown for 10 years, and he asked us not to use his last name because, after all, discretion is part of the job description. Peter Behrman, a sociology professor at Columbia, wrote a book called Doormen that deals with this complex relationship. As it turns out, the process of holiday tipping reflects that complexity.
I think a lot of tenants like to give the same amount to each doorman, but they try to distinguish also with small differences the relationship that they have with particular individuals.
Behrman says that oftentimes the tip functions as both a thank you for the service from the year before and a sort of down payment for the year ahead. And how much someone tips depends on a lot of things: the building culture, the number of building workers, or whether or not tenants know about the custom at all. Like, for example, international student Conchita Wijoyo.
I was not aware that tipping your doorman was a thing.
But it is definitely a thing, so much so that in 2016, the New York Times published a guide on how to best tip your doorman. The guide said that the absolute worst thing you could do is give them nothing at all. Here's Keelan again, who has a slightly different take.
I wouldn't expect a student or somebody at a young age to come forward. Now, when you don't get a tip from somebody who's worth $100 million and you've been working all year long and busting your back and they're demanding extra services, at that point, it's a slap in the face.
But most people do tip. According to an annual poll conducted by online real estate magazine Brick Underground, only 2% of renters are not tipping this year. Ricardo Torres, who has rented in the same building near Union Square for over 20 years, tips each of his doormen $100 every Christmas. And he's noticed that come Thanksgiving, the behavior of his doormen starts to change ever so slightly.
They do get a little bit more at attention. You can see that the military posture comes in a little more, you know what I mean? Open the door, and so on. So you have to be on your P's and Q's and make your tenants happy so they tip.
And while this service surge might be happening, Behrman says that tenants are often imagining that doormen are doing more, when actually the holidays are just a busier time in general. But according to Keelan, New Yorkers ask a lot of their doorman all year round.
From folding clothes to mailing bras through FedEx to passports, and I mean just a ridiculous list of just anything you could possibly think of that you need done at home and you're not there. A lot of times guys will do it.
And because of that, those tenants who choose not to tip might want to reconsider.
It's definitely a custom that needs to be respected in order to have the respect of your workers there in the building, and then also to feel like you're valued at least. A thank you for everything you do all year long.
So whether it's $20 or $100, the jury is out. This month, you really ought to tip. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Lara Kleinschmidt.
In some parts of New York City, it's tough to avoid another Christmas tradition: trees. Right after Thanksgiving, evergreens take over some sidewalks, and it seems like there are small forests everywhere. Sophia Jeremias reports on the business of selling these seasonal trees.
On the Upper West Side, one tree seller has cornered the market: Uptown Christmas trees.
Jane Waterman and her husband, George Nash, started their business 44 years ago. Waterman guesses that they are the second largest retailer in the city. They have 19 stands. She sizes up a balsam at one of her locations.
So this is a huge tree. It's very full and very fat, and it smells terrific. You can't see that on the radio, but it smells terrific.
She turns to one of her sellers.
What would you sell this tree for, Matt?
I'm selling this for $85.
$85.
Waterman and Nash live in Vermont. He started selling trees because he worked in construction, and there wasn't much to do in the winter months. They started off with one stand.
First started on our very first location, George lived in a truck, and he just slept in the front seat of the truck.
Over time, they upgraded to sleeping in trailers. As the business grew, they brought in relatives and friends to work for them. With the advent of Craigslist, they were able to sublet apartments. To communicate with drivers, Nash drove around in a truck to each stand. Today, they use Slack. Nash and Waterman are able to make their entire living for the year now.
I mean, it's a profitable business, I can tell you that.
Uptown Trees sells about 20,000 trees each year for around $70 a pop. But she says it isn't easy money.
It's also an extremely difficult business, and it takes a lot of, the logistics of it is very difficult, and it's taken us a long time to figure out how to do it right.
They start prepping in late September or October.
So we go up and visit all of our growers. Trees are grown in a plantation and rows, just like carrots are.
There are even trends in Christmas trees they have to consider when buying stock.
I'm hoping that New York would start to love balsams again, because it would make everybody's life a lot easier.
Frasers are the most popular tree, but they aren't easy to get a hold of. All the legwork is done before the couple starts selling. Once they are in the city, the hours are grueling. Nash says that for the most part, they work 12-hour days, but they can often be much longer.
I start at 7 in the morning, and lots of times we're done at 7, but sometimes we'll work to 10 or 11 or 12 at night.
At one of their locations in Harlem, Matt Earlrace is running the stand. He lives in northern Vermont the rest of the year. He's a carpenter. Selling trees supplements his income.
It takes up a big chunk of time that I don't have work. In the wintertime where I come from, it's hard to find carpentry work that's always inside, and so this is a good transition into winter for me.
He also likes the social aspects of the job.
I enjoy the culture shock, really. I mean, where I live, there's not anywhere near as many people, and those that are there, you don't get to interact with like you do here.
Waterman says he's not the only employee who enjoys the work.
People get tree fever, It's one of those things that we have people who just love it so much that they reorganize the rest of their life so that they can sell trees here.
That's what happened to her and her husband, and it paid off. Waterman says it's not just about the business, though. She sees herself as an important piece of Christmas in New York City. Sophia Jeremias, Columbia Radio News.
That's it for today's edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Maura Lavelle, joined by senior producer Jivika Verma and producers Tia Thomas and Laura Kleinschmidt.
Director Maggie Green has kept things running smoothly in the studio with Libby Cathy and Javier Mariwala.
Alia Chaudhry got the stream live to the web. Senior editor Camille Peterson and assistant editor Sarah Weissman handled the words. Music was by Blue Dot Sessions.
Our instructors, Ashley Milne-Tite and Ellen Horn, advised our team. I'm Ora Ogunbi.
And I'm Mike Dominski. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.